Thanks to Professors Shah and Kayani, the Lahore University for Management Sciences, and the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative for hosting this virtual Business and Human Rights Career Fair. My name is Anthony Ewing. As an adjunct, I am a lecturer at Columbia Law School, where I have taught business and human rights since 2001. I also co-founded and co-direct the Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum, a unique platform for collaboration among individuals teaching the subject of business and human rights worldwide. Briefly, I'd like to describe the business and human rights courses that I teach and make a few points about the relevance today of business and human rights education. At Columbia Law School, I teach an introductory elective business and human rights course. It's open to law students as well as students from other graduate students from other divisions of the university, such as business, international, and public affairs. The syllabus, the course essentially covers 4 topics. First, we consider competing definitions of corporate responsibility. Then we introduce international human rights standards relevant for business and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. We survey tools for holding corporations accountable for their adverse human rights impacts. And we introduce students to corporate best practice, primarily through case studies and examples from the field. I also teach an advanced seminar on business and human rights. That course, which was launched a couple of years ago, is designed to provide students already familiar with business and human rights in some form an opportunity to deepen their knowledge of the field and to apply best practices for managing the human rights impacts of business enterprises. Admission to that course requires some prior work experience in business and human rights or equivalent coursework. Typically, at least 3/4 of my course students at Columbia Law are LLM candidates. Many LLM candidates arrive at Columbia with some legal experience already working on business and human rights issues. The syllabus for the advanced course, which is called Managing Human Rights, tracks the actions businesses are taking to meet the responsibility to respect human rights. The course is organized roughly around the steps outlined in the UN guiding principles. Adopting a human rights policy, identifying human rights impacts through human rights due diligence, preventing human rights impacts by engaging stakeholders, adopting enterprise-wide human rights programs, mitigating or providing remedy for adverse human rights impacts connected to a company's operations. And then finally, communicating the steps that a company has taken. For each of these topics, students during the course engage in some form of experiential learning, typically in the form of an exercise, such as drafting a human rights policy or developing the human rights indicators for a specific human rights impact assessment applied to a specific situation, or role-playing how to apply a human rights lens to corporate functions in a hypothetical situation that raises human rights concerns. For more information about the Columbia Law School curricula or my courses, feel free to visit the website law.columbia.edu. The business and human rights field has evolved to the point where a comprehensive business and human rights curriculum today would include an introductory course, essentially a survey course, introducing students to the field of business and human rights, but also more advanced and detailed coursework on specific or particular topics, as well as clinical offerings that emphasize experiential learning. Some programs that are taking the lead in educating business and human rights, educating students on these topics, have a more comprehensive curriculum. Not simply the introductory courses, but also more specific courses. And I expect that that's something that we'll see more of as demand for business and human rights education continues to increase. So why is business and human rights education important? I would emphasize 3 points. First, business and human rights has become a distinct field of study and of corporate practice over the past 20 years or so. Second, lawyers and other professionals who understand business and human rights standards are better equipped to advise clients and their employers. And third, demand for business and human rights education is growing from students, within companies, and at universities. Thanks to 2 decades of human rights advocacy aimed at companies, rising stakeholder expectations of corporate conduct, the development of international standards like the UN Guiding Principles, and a growing body of corporate practice, business and human rights has become a distinct field of study and of practice at the intersection of business law and public policy. The business and human rights movement has expanded from an initial focus on labor conditions in global supply chains and corporate complicity with repressive states and security forces to examine human rights conditions in industries as diverse as agriculture, as healthcare, as technology. The human rights affected by corporate conduct are understood today to encompass the full range of internationally recognized human rights, including the right to health, particularly relevant and important today during the global COVID-19 pandemic, when some business and human rights teachers are critically considering corporate responses to the global pandemic and corporate responsibilities in response to COVID-19. Rights to adequate food and water, rights to privacy and freedom of expression are all understood to fall within the field of business and human rights. The UN Guiding Principles, which were endorsed unanimously by the UN Human Rights Council in 2011, forged a common language and working consensus for business people and advocates alike on corporate human rights responsibilities. Prodded along by the UN Guiding Principles, governments are addressing the human rights impacts of business through national legislation and regulation, such as mandatory corporate human rights reporting and national action plans. And at the same time, business and human rights has been taught as an academic discipline in some form for over 25 years. In the last 10 years alone, more than 100 universities have added business and human rights courses to their curricula. And the subject is now being taught in a multidisciplinary fashion at business schools, law schools, and schools of public policy worldwide. Lawyers and other professionals who understand business and human rights standards are better equipped to advise clients. Essentially, business and human rights is now part of the modern lawyer's toolkit for advising clients. Lawyers are increasingly asked to help businesses understand what the responsibility to respect human rights means in practice. And lawyers and other advisors are helping companies to design and implement human rights compliance and risk management systems, to meet human rights reporting and disclosure requirements, to navigate human rights disputes, to negotiate contracts and agreements with human rights provisions, and to participate in human rights standard setting initiatives. As a result and consequence of these trends, demand for business and human rights education is growing and continues to do so among students, within companies, and at universities. In all sectors, there is a need for university and professional school graduates who understand the relevance of international human rights standards for business, who are familiar with the principles contained in the UN Guiding Principles, and who have been exposed to best practices for managing the human rights impacts of business through actual case studies. Multinational companies want to hire graduates in some instances with the knowledge and skills to effectively recognize and manage human rights risks and opportunities. For some companies, these skills are becoming part of the job description for a wide range of business functions, ranging from legal, risk management, and human resources, for example, to procurement, product design, and fields like investor relations. In response to growing demand, more and more individuals are teaching the subject at universities and customizing curricula to address local business and human rights issues in specific geographies, such as recent efforts in Pakistan. The Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum that I co-direct exemplifies the growth of the field. We launched the Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum in 2011. In just under 10 years, the network has grown to include more than 350 individuals teaching at some 200 institutions in 45 countries worldwide, including Pakistan. Teaching Forum resources include an active discussion board for teachers, teaching workshops and webinars, and a public online Teaching Business and Human Rights handbook. You can find more information at the website teachbhr.org. To conclude, educating future managers, advocates, policymakers, and their advisors on business and human rights issues is a critical means to advance both the corporate responsibility to respect human rights and the traditional state responsibility to protect human rights. Students preparing today for careers in business, law, and government should expect universities worldwide to equip them to understand and navigate the business and human rights landscape. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this important event that seeks to promote business and human rights education. Thank you so much.